Other treatments. Relationship development, RDI, another form of treatment. In the studies that I've seen, they use the ADOS as an outcome measure, and I'm not convinced that that's a great outcome measure, and their outcomes are not fabulous. So if I have a family of limited financial means especially, I say, let's go with what we know works. I wouldn't pay for RDI out of my pocket. I tend to go with ABA as first choice or pivotal response training. I don't have that on here, but PRT has certainly had good success rates and has been shown to be effective.
I say it's all I learned.
Yeah, I bet, because you were in Santa Barbara.
Well, Santa Barbara, and then I was at Stanford, and all we did at Stanford was also
PRT. Yeah. So PRT is also good if you can get the training. It's harder to get trained on PRT. It was developed by people out of Santa Barbara, so that's why I say if you're in Santa Barbara, you pretty much that's what you learn.
Know about it.
Yeah, you tend to know. Speech and language, almost always. I can't imagine a situation where I wouldn't have a good speech and language evaluation and intervention. Very rarely, even if it's on just pragmatics, and usually it's not just pragmatics, it's other understanding of the function and structure of language that's a problem. Picture exchange systems, absolutely. I think they're invaluable. PECs are the key to communication for little kids who aren't talking, and very important. A lot of parents get concerned that if they use PECs, they won't otherwise communicate. It's not what the research shows. If you give them a system of communication, it actually makes language easier in the long run. Occupational therapy. Okay, I am not a fan of sensory integration disorder. I will just be honest in my bias and put it out there. It has not been well researched and studied. That's just the bottom line. There aren't good studies yet for it. I get that there are kids who have sensory issues, and the DC 0 to 3 allows us to diagnose sensory issues, but they don't for kids who are older, and they should. Because I do see kids who have an aversion to tags or have a lot of sensory issues. The issue becomes for me, if you have a family who has to brush a child all the time, first of all, I find most parents can't keep up with it. It has unrealistic expectations, and then they feel more like a failure than a success. And two, I just don't find it works for most kids. Parents will tell you absolutely differently, and I'm with their experience, and if they can afford it, go for it. Typical long-term OT, the way the old school used to do it, looking at gross motor and fine motor, harder and harder to find those OTs. Is that your all's experience in Orange County or not?
No, at Kaiser.
No, you guys could.
Yeah, we have a full OT department.
Oh,
They do, yeah.
oh, I'm in.
They do the whole gamut of sensory and fine motor.
Oh, I'm so envious. That's great. Those folks are harder and harder to find.
It's hard to find for specific populations. Like there's some general OT centers, but they're just not what
Yeah.
we're looking for in terms of this. And like, the coveted places in Pasadena, and there's like a,
6-month waiting list.
Waiting list. And
Yeah.
it's just so long.
Yeah, hard to find those. Physical therapy, again, that's something that's sort of fallen by the wayside a little bit, but can be helpful. Social skills, social groups, you know, that's key. Social groups for these kids, and doing social groups, running social groups for kids, adolescents, adults with developmental disabilities and autism, really, really important.
And that's something we can't find. I mean, we call,
Yeah.
you know, frequently to see, do you have anything for like the 11 and over, and we just cannot find it. We use CARES for the, if parents can travel to South Orange County,
Yeah.
but it's just for the little ones. And
Yeah. No, I know it's hard. I've toyed with trying to do something over the internet because I think that would be actually very successful, and most of these kids would love to be on the internet. Yeah. So there are a couple things going on about that. I have a friend actually in Texas who's working on an intervention on Second Life. I don't know if anybody here knows what Second Life is, but it's really incredible. It's an environment where you can go in and create an avatar, and then you actually have to engage in social interactions, those sorts of things online. It's a much safer environment for kids on the spectrum. Plus, they usually love the computers, so it's a twofer, as I call it. Visual versus verbal prompts, one of the things you're going to look at later, one of the pieces of work that I've done is looking at, for example, teaching kids math. In our society, a lot of times we teach kids math. California at one point had a rod-based system for teaching math. For kids with visual deficits or visual spatial deficits, it's the death knell to learn math, and math relationships and geometry can be very tough. So verbally teaching math and verbally testing math, you'll get a much different result. Very easy interventions for kids, and we'll talk about this later, things like using graph paper to line numbers up. So there's some really simple techniques that you can use to intervene with these kids. Once you pinpoint, the key is, and we're going to talk this more on the advocacy portion, is to really understand what is the deficit and where is it being broken down. And that's why it's key to get a good assessment, and why I tend to be a fan of neuropsych. Because once you figure out, is it a visual spatial, is it a learning, is it encoding, is it a retrieval, then you map that into your IEP by domain and say, this is the intervention and this is what we're going to do for that. And then you have a measurable goal with relation to that deficit.
What's the latest research on GFCF diets and?
Yeah, I looked at a bunch of studies a couple months ago. No, they couldn't find anything.
Okay.
No relationship. Parents will tell you there is. They swear by it, and not have, so far it hasn't panned out, and that was, the last time I looked at that was probably a month ago, and it just wasn't panning out. The gluten-free wasn't helping. Interestingly, I looked at ketogenic too, because when I trained in epilepsy units, parents would swear by the ketogenic diet, which is really, really high fat. This is a very interesting diet. And we have parents swear by it. I've got a little guy right now who's got occipital lobe seizures, who I've been working with for 5 years in my practice. Not controlled. Occipital seizures are really hard to control on meds, and his parents are trying everything. They've tried gluten-free, they've tried ketogenic, and they are about as compliant as any family I've ever seen. Nothing. I mean, just not getting anything from it. And that's a sample of one, so that's obviously not a big research. But I saw a lot more families with kids with epilepsy, and they swore by the ketogenic diet, and the good research controlled studies aren't really panning on that either. The other therapy that you'll see, hyperbaric chambers is the other thing that you'll see around here. I see a lot of parents that will talk about chelation. No effect is what they're finding. Chelation can be painful and often dangerous. Hyperbaric chambers, same thing. They've had kids die. 1 or 2 kids die in a hyperbaric chamber. You know, what I tell parents, this is how you guys, I'm sure, have your own style. If it's not going to harm the child and they can afford it, and it's not stacking up of 5 or 6 treatments that will interfere with what we know work, go for it. You know, if you want to do an organic diet because you think it's going to help, go for it. If you want to do, you know, things like non-stick, when you use a pan with coating in it, yeah, they think that might be related. Don't be cooking in that. You know, if that's what you want to do, go for it. Do I have good studies about it? No. That's what I tell folks. But gluten-free, no, and ketogenic, no, as of a month ago.